Well, I'd like to say something humorous in order to be entertaining, but my coffee isn't even ready yet, so I can't.
All right.
Hi, this is Curt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute. It's Friday, December 29th. This is our Q&A session where we take questions submitted by viewers or followers, whatever they be acolytes, fans, fellow adventurers, and Francis collects them and Martin does the work, and then I act like I know something. So it's a good time to answer the harder questions. What's been interesting over time is how much harder the questions have gotten. So Francis, hello. Martin, hello. And audience, hello. Let's get started.
Hello.
All right. I'll start with question number 1. Please deliberate. How would the NLI prosecute disingenuous libtards who practically commit an act of public vandalism when they put up a statue of Baphomet in the Iowa state capitol as a way of protesting religious influence of governmental affairs? How would an NLI trained lawyer argue against the Satanic temples and other organizations such as the Church of Satan, claim that it is a religion and thus qualify for equal religious representation? I think this is interesting because it is in the news lately, and we're talking about leftist organizations here who probably have a team of lawyers to call to defend their right to undermine society. And there's this guy here.
I can imagine we don't have to look at that.
Okay. All right, Martin, you want to?
Yeah. Equal religious representation is something that exists now due to using the letter of the First Amendment against its spirit, and we put an end to that. We obviously wouldn't allow exhibits specifically designed to offend native population and any symbols that are contrary to our traditions, let alone those that explicitly represent absolute evil. This case has been an amazing example why every law, every right, obligation, and alienation has to have its purpose written, because the delusion, ignorance, or malevolence it takes to believe or claim that the founding fathers had Satanism in mind when writing First Amendment beggars belief. And from self-identified Christian classical liberals too, demonstrating they're actually neither. Something else that has been argued that it guarantees the right to offend. Well, it guarantees the right to offend with the truth when saying it is expedient to common benefit. It doesn't guarantee the right to offend for its own sake, not without real possibility of retaliation.
Wow, that was devastating, Martin. I'm trying to think if I can add to anything. Correct. How can I formalize that anymore? The intent of freedom of religion is to prevent the government from breaking trifunctionalism by taking over the faith. It is not meant to cause us to, and it should not, cannot. It can't, so that's number one. Because I want to make sure I separate what it says and what it means from what it should say and mean. What it should say and mean, which Martin's really addressed thoroughly, is simply that religions are group evolutionary strategies of a people. They are inseparable from the ternary logic of the trifunctional competition and balance equilibrium between the forces of coercion or influence of coercion, persuasion, influence, and coercion. And so it's one thing to say that we will not have the state interfere with the faith, not have the state become the arbiter of the faith or source of the faith, but instead that if in the state constitution we propose the natural law, that the religions not violate the natural law, and secondly that any faith that violates the natural law and or violates our group evolutionary strategy in our tradition is illegal, simply because the purpose of religions is to form an equilibrium. Besides its internal benefit, its external political benefit is to precisely provide that balance against the tendency of the state, and it should constrain the state to the via negativa, just as the state should be constraining the faith to the via positiva. And so lastly, the group evolutionary strategies aren't compatible. In other words, they're all, if they're different, then they're incompatible. Since religion represents the group evolutionary strategy of a people, then any religion that's incompatible with the group evolutionary strategy, incompatible with the natural law, and incompatible with the present faith is hostile, which is what we see. So we should understand in that sequence that religions are a means of resistance against power, and if they're not resistance to contain power, they're offense to harm power. And in our case, in the West, natural law is just the law of the universe, and commonality and concurrency a way of discovering it. Then, of course, any religion that is not compatible with, basically consistent with the religion that you have as your in the West, which would be an act of warfare, which is what we see happening. And unfortunately, there's only hostile religions are Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. It's hard to argue that Confucianism is hostile. It's hard to argue that Hinduism is harmful, at least unless it becomes a dominant competitor. It's certainly hard to argue that Buddhism is harmful, and again, unless it becomes too dominant. But these are not expressly hostile religions, as are Judaism and Islam. Did I do okay with that? I feel like I tried to cover too many points too fast. But Martin really kills it here with it's the abuse of the First Amendment by confusing its statement with its spirit. And Martin correctly states why we need to have the positiva stated so that this can't happen. I thought that was brilliant, Martin.
Of course, you're naming just hostile supernatural religions, whereas we would include pseudoscientific religions as well.
Yes, correct. So thank you for that. So under our definitions, as Martin's alluding to, a religion is what is something that achieves a certain, how do we say it? It makes a false promise. Well, go ahead, you say it.
I mean, can we then make a true religion if you specifically define religion as something that's false?
Yes. It's hard to say Confucianism is false, right? It's hard to say Stoicism and Epicureanism are false.
How do you define a false religion?
It has to make a false promise.
Oh, I see.
So all Judaism, Islam, and Christianity make the false promise that of an alternate universe in which whatever, and knowledge of God and the scripture is true, whatever. So if you instead were to take these things and call them wisdom literature, and if you would take, Jefferson Bible is my favorite example. He just takes all the magic out of it and leaves it with the claims of Jesus, and which basically is a form of deism, which God, it's an allegorical deism. God wants the world to be this way. I'm trying to position myself as a representative of the way God wants the world. And in doing so, I'm communicating these basic ideas and etc. So from a Jeffersonian Bible perspective, Christianity practice under that way would be good. The problem that I see with Christianity, and actually Martin and I would probably need to discuss this for the audience, so that because I became clear to me talking to Brad last night that I think Martin and I understand this very clearly, and I'm not sure others do, is when we're talking about, how do I say this? We're talking about, I lost my, I went down a rat hole, lost my point. Martin, can you help me out what I was getting to? Can we help me? If we go back.
Does it relate to the question Brett asked me? Which was,
Yes.
Martin, what is the problem with Christianity you call Abrahamism?
Yes, the problem I have with Abrahamism is that if we should be treating it like we treat Aesop's fables as a wisdom literature. And that's fine. But the minute it becomes more than that, you're basically teaching people to lie. And so by claiming it's true rather than claim it's wisdom, which contains truths or infers truths, that teaches people to lie. So my real problem with these things is that they are arrogant, that they said there's only one God, and that they're in the case of Islam, they're the final, that they teach people to lie, and that lying becomes the means by which the religion is conveyed, rather than wisdom. And so I'd like sometime for Martin and I to, we can, if we have.
I can read the answer I sent to Brett.
Okay.
The aspects of Abrahamism Christianity employs are using feminine means of coercion, shaming, and demonizing individuals if they don't signal the correct beliefs prescribed by the dogma, as opposed to judging morality of the behavior of individuals. This produces an in-group and out-group distinction based on shared ideology rather than shared heritage, norms, ethics, and ability to cooperate, and justifies sedition against what would otherwise be in-group members if they don't share the religion. In line with that, it substitutes free will and the use of discernment for figuring out what's the moral action in any given scenario for a list of commands. Morality is no longer about non-imposition and not provoking retaliation. It's about success. It's not about success of the group. It's whatever authorities representing God say it is. Seeing yourself as morally just for having the right beliefs then allows for not feeling any responsibility for anything immoral if it's in line with the dogma. And therefore, any negative reaction you get to your action can always be explained as immorality of people reacting to you. You are always the martyr.
Mhm.
Likewise, it can justify all sorts of special pleading. In general, there's a tendency to disregard evidence where it goes against the dogma. And that's just off the top of my head. Christianity has somewhat mitigated many of these over history. Auto radicals have popped up every now and then and brought back worst of it.
Yeah, Mark, you're so good at what you do. That was awesome. Can you later today just make a note to post that on the site?
Sure.
Can you just post it like under your answer here?
Yeah, because it's fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, obvious way that it was mitigated was treating morality as a list of commands. So Aquinas turned that into natural law.
Say that again.
Aquinas changed what were basically just authoritarian commands into natural law.
Yes.
Is is it fair to say that one thing that makes Judaism, Islam, Christianity false, at least original Christianity false, is the belief of the supernatural, right? The miracles and the resurrection.
I wouldn't say that because plenty of other religions have believed in the supernatural, and they're not Abrahamic.
No, I mean so I'm trying to define what false religion means. So false religion is something that asks its followers to believing something false.
Yes.
And by that, following that logic, then any of such documented miracles, I would call them false, because I don't see of any ways that we can. I don't think they're falsifiable in the first place.
Well, I mean, go ahead, Martin, go ahead.
I don't make so strict limits. If it makes unfalsifiable claims, that's fine. The problem is when it conveys false morality and when it makes false predictions about the real world that people could act on.
False predictions about the world.
Like, I don't see the claim of Christ's resurrection as an issue because it doesn't say anyone else will be resurrected.
Well, it did kind of say that in the Revelations, right? All those who believe in
Right.
Christ will be resurrected or something. It's been years since I read that passage.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I would say the act of falsehood consists of claiming something's true rather than a parable, right? And right, so for example, one of the best lessons that everybody knows is what we call sour grapes, which is a description of psychological behavior, right? The fox tries to get the grapes. He can't jump high enough to get them. So he says to himself, he sedates himself. It's important. He sedates his failure with by saying, well, they were sour. Those grapes must have been sour anyway, right? Right. So that's a parable. Is it trying to say that the fox is true? The fox actually tried to get the grapes and thought that the fox has no cognizance of whether the grapes are sour or not. And frankly, he probably wouldn't jump in the air to get them either, right? Fox is just a character, and the Russians make a beautiful work of foxes. It's one of their archetypes of human character. So so when you say that, do we believe it's false? No. In other words, do we believe it's an allegory? Excuse me. Yes. By positioning it as an allegory, it's fine, right? It conveys a truth, even though it's not true. That's what wisdom, right? I mean, wisdom literature in the form of parables should convey a truth, even though they are not explicitly true. And this was, in doing so, we break the barrier between empathizing and systematizing, or rather, experience and logic. So, and logic and reason, and so that makes it digestible and memorable for humans because they can empathize with the character, even though they can't, even if they can't necessarily develop that intuition, that emotional and psychological intuition, if the rule is just stated as abstractly, humans justify what they cannot achieve in order to sedate themselves from their failures. So number one, it's stated it's true rather than wisdom. Secondly, that's number one. It teaches how to lie by doing so, and it also can convey and does convey false promises. Now, is life after death a false promise versus the Marxist claim that after revolution, everyone will be equal? Which one of those was Martin tolerating, and which one was he not? He was tolerating the false promise of life after death because it's untestifiable and makes no prediction that is going to be testifiable. It's not testifiable, and it's not falsifiable. And so it's in those cases, we can say, well, it's a parable, right? But when you say the Marxist equivalent of reality, which is that after revolution, we will all be equal, or after whiteness, we will end oppression. These are just false promises that are predictions of outcomes in the real world.
Well, they're specifically justifying revolution, which is a bigger issue here.
Oh, great, thank you. And they're specifically justifying a revolution, and in particular, a revolution against the institutions that are the product of natural law.
I see. So the key difference here is, one, in Christianity, it promises life after death. Like you said, it's not falsifiable. Therefore we can treat it as a parable. And then the thing that you have to do to achieve life after death is you need, in essence, you need to behave morally, to be a good person.
All right, it's a psychological measurement. Behave as if there's life after death, so you behave well in this life, right? It could, because over time it will turn out for you. But it's the same thing as I mean, every recurrent religion. Who does this best? Buddhism does this best, right?
Reincarnation, the nine hells. What is it? That I think the different realms is what they're talking about. If you behave very well, you can essentially hang out after the reincarnation. You can hang out with the Buddhas. Otherwise, the next round down, you become another human, and if you do really bad, then you become an animal or something.
Right. And in Scandinavian, which is of course true to my heart, it's you have to die well. In other words, if you want to get into real Valhalla, you have to have not only lived a good life, but you have to die well, which is basically a prohibition on cowardice. So these are good things, because when you say they're unfalsifiable, they're also there's also false promises, right? Those things are there, but they're also conveyable as mythologies, as myth, specifically because they're untestable, unfalsifiable, unknowable, basically, and therefore untestifiable. So they basically become parables. So as pedagogy, right, as a means of teaching, you again get that wonderful benefit of making things understandable emotionally and intuitionally, even if they're not even if the individual isn't capable of understanding them rationally. And I think this is the mistake that this is my only real criticism of the people who are diehard atheists or diehard rationalists, is that people aren't equal in their, as we know, I mean, we know better than anybody else in our field, people aren't equal in their ability to adopt a grammar, right? From the intuitionistic all to the abstract. Across that arc, they're not equally able to it. But almost all of us are able to understand and intuit a parable that's an analogy to direct human experience. So when we teach things through these parables, then we're teaching the intuition that persists despite the lack of the reason necessary to learn any higher grammar of greater abstraction from human experience. So I have this problem with saying that when we say we want a true religion, does that mean we wouldn't teach things like our myths and the Aesop's fables, myths and fairy tales, the matter of Greece and Rome, the matter of France, the matter of Germany, the matter of England. There's actually a matter of Scandinavia, Scandinavia. There's a matter of more important, we are less aware of, a matter of the Slavic peoples, which is actually quite fascinating when you get into it, because it preserves a lot more of our ancient taste than some of our own preserving myths. And so we have to have that stuff, right? And then we have to have the philosophical representation of it that explains it in a way that still is a bridge between parable and science. And then we need the science, which is what we do, us guys do, to explain that grammatical hierarchy. You know, we can't, I mean, somebody sent me a note today, someone referenced me and said, yeah, this guy in some podcast was referenced me and said, well, yeah, I follow him, but it's too hard for the normies to understand. And I certainly agree.
What's stuck, yeah.
But
That was Devon Stuck.
I don't
Real
know.
guy.
Do I know him?
Well, I've often referenced him as someone who's been doing excellent Hollywood propaganda analysis.
Great.
He's doing much more than that, so
Maybe I need to follow him.
maybe you do.
So we have had some great, there was a conversation I had with Brad last night because of Martin's email. I wish I'd recorded it, but we're doing really good work on religion these days, and I'm kind of surprised.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that Christian promise of afterlife, there's nothing Abrahamic about that. Judaism doesn't have it. It comes from, it sure looks like it comes from Platonism, but it was something that was common to all the cultures around.
Mhm.
Whereas Judaism was materialistic, as their reference show, but it seems like that's just being literally buried in the ground.
Mhm. Mhm. All right, did we get this one across? Who's here? I want to say hi. Graciano, hello. Potter, hello. Carvalho, Levi, nice to hear from you. Levi says, I'd like to thank NLI for this use. I improved a lot. I improved my worldview a lot with the insights. I feel privileged to know you. Great. Happy 24 to you all. That was really sweet. Alejandro Dominguez is up there. I think I got everybody I know. I know who it is. So thanks for following. Is it time for, do we close that one up, Francis? Do you
I
think?
think so. All right, let's move on to question number 2. From Alex, Curt has asserted confidently in the past that the universe is deterministic. He also praises Joshua Bach very highly, who has stated in the past that base level reality has no priors. The universe is tautology and can be described as a non-determinist Turing machine with the Kolmogorov complexity of 0. I am mostly interested in the disconnect when it comes to Bach's and Curt's belief on whether the universe is deterministic or not, and where Curt thinks this disconnect comes from, although his interpretation of the whole quotation would also be very interesting. Note, I'm aware that Curt is not a god, and if he hasn't studied theoretical computer science in great depths, this is perfectly understandable.
I would say that most of my work has its origin in a theoretical an understanding of theoretical computer science, which is why it's reducible to computability. Um, I would say that it's hard. I love Joshua Bach because when he's talking, if I translate what he's saying, um, uh, if I translate what he's saying, he's basically right. Just as our group, we try to take everything and turn it into a universally commensurable language that is subjectively testable as well as objectively testable. You know, it's actionable in one way or another. Um, then Joshua tends not to do that. He tries to frame everything as computer science in the same way that mathematicians try to reduce everything to mathematics. So it's a little bit sometimes difficult to understand what he's saying. I understand this statement is that is concurrent with Wolfram's research, and that in that the universe evolved the rules it has because they're the only rules a universe can evolve. In other words, I don't believe in the multiple universes with multiple sets of variables. The universe is adversarially competitive at every level because it has to be for reasons that are rich, and I'm afraid that, given I've taken an allergy pill this morning, if I switch over to trying to explain all that right away, I'll forget what I was talking about again. So it's more that there's no that the universe arises from no initial rule set, but instead a problem, which appears to be pressure, and that because everything results from pressure and friction. I mean, it's like heat. So what he's saying is that what it's going to do is something that it can itself calculate, but does not know at the beginning. In other words, there's no purpose to it. It's just going to calculate whatever's calculable at every temperature and pressure over and in every set of resource conditions, and that computation is unknowable. So when we say it's the problem with this way he's stating this as a with a what do you call it, with determinism, is there's a difference between hard determinism and soft determinism. Hard determinism would be that the outcome is of any processes are given at the beginning rather than discovered by trial, error, and complexity. And soft determinism is that we can, by observations of the universe, develop rules of continuous application, which means that the universe does obey these laws. If the universe wasn't deterministic at some level, in other words, if for us about dropping a rock didn't fall down because of gravity, it would be impossible for sentient life to evolve because sentient life is predicated on the use of the neurological system to make predictions from which about the world based because of regularities. And if we couldn't do that, evolution couldn't function. In other words, life couldn't function. And even then, evolution couldn't function because no storage of information would be predictive of future value of that information. So I think it's partly he's using a set of terminology here that is, again, directly out of computer science, but it's out of computer science and physics and philosophy. And in that sense, he's not clarifying what he means by the Turing machine. In other words, there's a deterministic Turing machine should produce a determinable outcome, and it doesn't. Does this make sense? Is that person on here?
I don't think so.
So I think I think I answered that question. And what it really is nothing more complicated than a misunderstanding of determinism as the scope of categorical consistency over time. See, let me think of anything else. Really, that's, I mean, for example, here's a great example in AI sense. What is an ant's perception of the world, right? They're very small, things are very big. So what objects and spaces and borders are they aware of, and over what time period? Then you go to a dog. I mean, you know, how long is a dog's memory? Right? And you know, it's a few minutes really, in the sense of maintaining context, but and even throwing things like the trick I used to try to teach my dogs was if I throw the toy over the house, right, into the back, from the front yard into the backyard, that they have to go into the backyard to get it. Now this is fairly easy the dog if the dog can hear it. It's easy if your house is on a plot where there's a side yard to go through. But in our house, we lived in what do you call it? A tradition, what do you call it? A courtyard house. So you can't get by on either side. You actually have to go through the front door, take a left, go out the courtyard this way, go down the side in the back toward the backyard, and then into the backyard and buy it and get whatever's back there. So this sequence seemed to be hard for the dogs to get. Well, it was a lot easier for my golden retriever than it was for our German short hair, which was kind of thick. So when you look at the world through these scales, you say, well, what's deterministic at what scale? For the reason our perception is somewhat limited sometimes is it's no use to us to perceive and predict a category that's inactionable to us. So that's what we didn't evolve to perceive categories at scale. So what's happened since the scientific revolution, and more importantly, what's happened since the 1800s, is our ability to perceive these categories at scale has become a necessity for it. Ergo, why we develop economics and what we think of as physics and biology, is that we're looking at things bigger than us and smaller than us, so we're not constrained like the ant and the dog are. So when you talk about determinism, there is a determinism available to the creature by evolutionary limits of utility, and there's, in other words, you can't evolve something that you can't learn, because you lack the ability to perceive it. So there's this problem of what we mean as determinism for humans is a scale problem. So what happened in the revolution of science is we started running into problems. Economics is the one I'm most familiar with. We started running into real problems of not understanding how the world works at scale. And this is why you still have the problem of the feminine versus the masculine, feminine in time, masculine over time, and why we have the problem in the voting structure of people who can perceive short-term or medium-term or long-term outcomes and vote accordingly. I suppose I should address Kolmogorov complexity, which is, I'll read the definition. The Kolmogorov complexity of a string is the length of the shortest possible program in a fixed programming language that can produce that string as an output. So the problem is, what's the length of the algorithm of the universe? There isn't any. There's just pressure. And so there's an existing condition. The algorithm of the universe is just how to release the pressure. What is that algorithm? Well, it's just what's available to it, right? There's no algorithm to it. This is the whole point. It is deterministic in the sense that all given temperature and pressure, you will evolve whatever rule set is necessary for the release of pressure, but there is no rule set to start with. Let's see if there's anything else here. Uncomputability. One of the critical properties of Kolmogorov complexity is it's uncomputable. This means there's no general algorithm that compute exact complexity of an arbitrary string. This is similar to what what's his name, Wolfram is saying, in that there are calculable and computable and uncomputable statements. In other words, assertions. Well, with Jesus Christ, I'm just realizing if I go through this, it's going to take me an hour to explain it in the detail that normies can understand it. But in essence, if there's no string, you have a complexity of 0. And so nothing can be computed. In other words, we can't tell ahead of time, and nothing can be calculated. We can't summarize into general rules. So we're left with basically evolution is the only way by trial and error to compute anything, because the only rule is basically survival by the release of pressure by either distribution into space or concentration into mass. Yeah, so I think I've answered that one about as thoroughly as I can. If anybody's a geeky enough to want to continue that discussion, add it to the questions, and I'll go into more detail. But I'm given that I've been as gentle as Francis is in his coaching of these discourses, that I've been told I need to shorten my lectures on these questions, so I'm going to keep it at that.
I think it's just that, I mean, I studied computer science back in college, and I have actually not heard of this term. So there's stuff here that I need to study up on. So Green Graciano stated, yes. So Curt's determinism is based of inevitable outcome of statistical generalities versus mechanical determinism.
So the mechanical determinism would mean the categories that were emerged would be, yeah, it's the problem of really, God, I don't know how to do this without, so yes, that's pretty close. How do you say it again? You read it again?
It's based, your determinism is based of inevitable outcomes of statistical generalities versus mechanical determinism.
I'd say those are what we can predict, but there's determinism in the sense that the universe can evolve only one way, even if we don't know what that is until it happens.
Correct. So I'm not sure I'd answer the question because I'm not exact. I think Martin's correct. I don't know how to break it down further because I'm not sure which question. Can you repeat it one more time? I think I keep running away with it. Give me one more time.
So Curt's determinism, so it essentially boils down to whether your determinism is based off of inevitable outcomes of statistical generalities instead of a mechanical determinism.
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that question without being misleading because I'm not sure I understand it. What I'm saying is that I agree with Bach, agrees with Wolfram. And the reason it's important that the three of us agree is, and it's not common in the physics community to agree with this, is because there's too much, that's not clear in the computer, is that there's too much disciplinary isolation between these systems of knowledge. And of course, Bach and I are also understand epistemology and neuroscience. And so when you're looking at these different factors, you say, well, I know that I'm right, that Bach is right, that Wolfram is right. And I think for me, Wolfram's contributed a couple of things, but the fact that the universe will evolve the rules it has, so it's not pre-designed and it's not fine-tuned for life. It's just these are the rules that any universe will resolve because there is no string. In other words, there is no set of rules to start with. And so the rules that survive are the only rules that can survive. And even if there were different pressures, we would see, as we see in the evolution of the universe so far, it appears that the rules remain the same either way. And that's what Wolfram's game of life with, which is what he's doing. He's writing his because Rule odds are essentially creating a game of life for the evolution of causality. So I mean, we're all saying, I'm trying to shut down and get myself down again. We're all saying the same thing. So when you say Curt's idea, it's not really my idea. It's really the idea that from what is the first premise upon which the universe enacts, and we're saying it's pressure, the evolutionary consequences of the release of pressure, which causes action, in other words, change in the states of the universe, and that the rules and the consequences it produces, they're not determinable given the variety of scales. Now, once we get to the point where we see something like chemistry, of course, then it becomes determinable. When we get down to something like below chemistry, like the formation of elements, right? Then that is determinable. But so we can find, but as complexity increases, determinability is only achieved through trial and error. It can't be known. This is what Wolfram's work on, beginning with Conway's Game of Life. It was his first insight with it. And it's not that dissimilar from the problem of Gödel numbering in logic or Chomsky's theory of language, is that what can be expressed in language isn't knowable because it's fucking infinite, right? And if you look at language, you look at mathematics as a language, and you look at the Rule system as a language, all those languages do is try to create sentences that survive. And the universe is just survives by the concentration of information, which a sentence is a concentration of information that persists longer than the external opportunities to not persist can compensate for. So I don't know. I don't know. I might have to have the person, Alex, listen to what I've just said there, if you can understand what I just said, and ask me a further question in a more precise language, because I can only describe the system at this level as an answer to a question when I'm not sure what the precision of the question is. Okay.
All right, shall we move on?
Yep.
Question number 3. Please deliberate. Should birth control in all forms be banned to increase birth rates and improve social dynamics, as well as prevent its potential negative evolutionary effect?
It's not clear that birth control is the primary factor insofar we want people to marry and choose to have kids rather than have kids as an unintentional side effect of having sex. If anything, the solution is to work with hypergamy, which is to say ensure women within the same genetic class as a man can always realistically increase her status by getting married to him. We have suggested policies to that end. For one, ending civil rights law and feminist propaganda will ensure women stop being flooded into work that they're worse at than men, which is most work. Education reform will terminate ideological fields women are attracted to that do increase status under the current regime but do not teach students anything actually productive. My own suggestion on top of that is penalizing any business or school that reduces the likelihood of women of reproductive age getting married and having children appropriately penalized. No, I said it twice. As they're imposing on the nation's future. The costs will sink onto the women themselves, who would thus be disincentivized from seeking alternatives to marriage. But all that said, there are very good reasons to ban hormonal pill, in particular because of it changing female psychology, which men they're attracted to, and because of environmental pollution. They're making the frogs gay.
Yeah, I would, Jesus, Martin, you're so good. The pill is a really bad thing. I'm not sure how much of our current crisis is the pill, but I think it's a lot. I would be comfortable banning the pill without question, given the knowledge we have today. I think the morning after pill is a fine answer, but I'm not, but which would cause a temporary thing. As for abortion, you know, my statement on abortion is that it's actually it's eugenic in large part, which is what Martin was trying to get at the beginning. So I'm not really a problem with it. My problem with abortion, with anti-abortion protest, is only that my agenda with pro-abortion is they're claiming it's not killing. It is killing. Sorry. Whether we want to say it's murder and therefore punishable or prohibitable, that's a political question. But it's a killing because you're doing a manual operation to interfere with the development of an organism. So it's a killing, but is it murder and it should be a outlawed? I don't know that answer. I'd prefer not to get rid of abortion myself for simply pragmatic reasons. And I think Martin is right, and he's usually right, except when I want to tease him. Is that the problem is that we've created an incentive structure that has made it undesirable to have children. So I have some things that are, you know, men are responsible for taxes. We pay almost all the relevant taxes. Men are the only net contributors to taxes. We absorb most of the damage, environmental damage in the universe. We have a Y chromosome, which means we're less able to repair it, which is the primary reason we live shorter lives. It takes us longer to mature into being able to do all that stuff. And we must, whenever there is conflict and war, we absorb the damage of that as well. So men are absorbing a great deal of damage on behalf of women, and though women, of course, make excuses for it. And so, in some sense, the only trade between men and women for this issue is that why isn't it just as much a duty to have children as it is to have a duty to pay taxes and to fight in wars and to maintain the commons and to obey it, because that's the only capital that women can contribute that compensates for the losses otherwise. So I'm not comfortable saying women have to have kids, but to some degree, unless you have kids, you're a free riding parasite on the people who do. And the status which Martin brought up is only the first part of it. So I'm kind of concerned. I mean, my view is if a woman doesn't have children, she has no say, right, in the polity. And because the evidence is she's not capable of making that say because of her own intuitions. And secondly, that why should a parasite have influence any more than a criminal have influence on the voting within the polity? So I'm sure women don't like me saying this, but we all have duties, rights, obligations, and duties. And I don't think one of our rights is to parasitically depend upon the productivity of people who do produce and do without. So I'm not sure why that kind of communist redistribution from people who bear the cost of having families to the people who don't is permissible. So yeah, so I would say Martin's completely correct here. So I think what's the question is, should birth control in all forms? No, because Martin's right. It's not really the birth control that's the problem, and the number increase in abortions is due to the availability of abortions, not necessarily to the number of offspring that would be produced if abortion wasn't available. So I think that's a mistake. So we have to fix the incentive systems. And if you look at our work, that's a lot of what we've done is restore the incentive systems. I mean, if you even took off the restored the blame and divorce, ended community property, child support, and alimony, that would have a huge impact on a lot of things. And if we taxed people for not having children and directly redistributed that to people who are, then we would provide an encouragement. And if we stopped this problem we're having of we're forgetting that the human adaptability to a mate is front loaded, meaning we're all sexually and personality, socially, economically, and politically adaptable when we're 14, 16 to 22. And that goes down faster after that. And so by delaying marriage, you're also delaying the incentive to find someone that you can have children and family formation with and have that endure. And so the solution, which is quite counterintuitive, the optimum solution, of course, is to have girls have children as soon as they're fertile and build families as early as they can in their fertility cycle, because it's as early as they can in their adaptive cycle. So, and if we're in the fertile and adaptive cycle, we can form stable families for longer. How do you do that? Well, it used to be that you had family support to make these things happen. And maybe that's what we need to do, is add more support to the families, to the persistent families, and deprive people who don't work in this manner of it. So there's a bunch of social engineering we can do that converts the economic incentives to hyper consume to economic incentives to hyper produce. That's my start. So again, Martin's right. What's the next one?
All right. Question 4 from Alex. Is it reasonable to worry about a super intelligent artificial intelligence causing the extinction of humanity, or is it another case of what Curt calls woo-woo?
Well, I consider it reasonable, though perhaps overstated, but I see as a far bigger worry driving demand for use of human brains down to nothing and effects thereof. To that point, I put sufficiently big tariffs on non-human labor.
Smart. Yeah. I think the way I put it in the Constitution is there is no value in replacing a human with a machine. It's sort of like, how do I do this? Curt, tell the story in your head before you start speaking it so you don't lose your train of thought. So if there's no reason you should replace somebody with automation if there's no harm to the person doing the job by doing the job. In other words, there's a lot of repetitive labor jobs that are dangerous, but it doesn't seem to be very useful to take people out of work where it's not harmful to them and it's not stressful to them. Now, if we all had 6-hour work days and they were 4-day weeks, which would reduce us to about the equivalent workday of a hunter-gatherer, maybe a little less, we would all benefit from the socialization provided by participating in the workforce. However, to accommodate that, machine productivity would have to go up, and an understanding of what constitutes an economy would have to change sufficiently so that the economy would tolerate people in work. I think that's the real. I think that's Martin's second point here is correct. It's the bigger worry is how do we solve the problem of human cooperation? The first problem he said, in other words, in the future economy, because I think the disruptive capacity is quite high. Now think about it. Now, the second thing is there's two pieces. The second is, well, what are AIs capable of doing? And the next one is Martin's first one, which is whether the risks of extinction of humanity being overstated. That's another one. I'm going to forget whichever one I start answering. So the first one is it's probably overstated because we have a means of decidability, which is to acquire faster than time and to achieve status and capitalization or consumption through acquisition. So at any time we have a means of decidability. The machines don't have that. They'd have to be given a reason to do something. So if you said, could a super intelligent artificial intelligence be used to develop, let's say, chemical, biological weapons, or to make some particular army so large that it was unconquerable by others, or could it assist in producing a plot which would destroy a polity from within? That's all possible if you told it to do that. The thing is, it would take people not knowing that was going on for it to happen. And so first of all, that's unlikely. And second, even if it was likely, our computers, which would be defending against it, would be looking at their computers trying to cause it. And I just think that policing action is a normal evolutionary sequence in our policing actions of increasing human activity at scale. The second thing on that is, what can computers really think of? So these inference machines are becoming very powerful. So what we've seen, the discovery of new molecules lately, because the information's there. We've discovered that these AIs can synthesize information more so than humans can, so they can find patterns of similarity between things that human brains can't. I mean, that's the same way you couldn't do my work before the internet, because information was too hard and slow to accumulate. So you couldn't do, or like how who did fractals? Mandelbrot said you couldn't compute a fractal. You couldn't do a fractal before a computer because people couldn't humanly make the calculations. It wasn't humanly possible. You couldn't remember the things we remember today because it wasn't humanly possible. In other words, keep records of it. Well, it's the same thing in the future. It can synthesize, but the limit on thought is not the ability to think. The limit on thought is that we don't know enough to think. And so the way we learn to know enough to think is to conduct tests and experiments. So how is this thing going to conduct experiments? How is it going to get the knowledge to invent anything other than find a correlation and a pattern in things we already know? And so I just don't see how this thing can get what we would call crazy smart. It might be crazy wise. I can see that happening. It might be crazy useful. That can happen. It could be put to crazy ill use. I see that using. But the problem with all human gaining of human knowledge is actually the problem of trial and error. And if you study Popper at all, and I'm a Popperian epistemologist, you'd study it and you'd say, well, the big constraint is that what to invest in experiment on is indeterminable because you lack the knowledge to be able to do it. Now, he's partly wrong in that it turns out that running cheap tests, the cheapest test to pursue the biggest unknown is actually what the universe does. So it turns out to be a correct algorithm for us. But in essence, there's no way to determine what to test. even though maybe they might help us do it, but somebody's got to run the test, and that requires physical human coordination and action. It doesn't, and I suppose you get the machine to figure out how to coordinate this action such that humans would be ignorant of what they were actually being asked to do. I mean, we do it today by breaking up a task into remote areas of the world and then bringing that information together so that it can be synthesized by some small group. But it's very hard to see a super intelligent machine causing the extinction of humanity. I think that we're going to see the same kind of, probably as big a disruption in the white collar workforce as we saw in the agrarian workforce during Industrial Revolution, and as we've seen in the manual workforce due to automation and globalization. I just see that a lot of these jobs we've invented since the age of computers began, I just see a lot of that going away. I mean, even today, if you look at, I get frustrated by this daily, is all I see happening from most of this AI work is the ability to spam people marketing better. And it's annoying. It's actually really annoying. And if I look at what the AIs can do for me, because they're so weak in their logic, is that all they can do for me is help me write by disambiguating terms, right? Which is what I use it for. Please compare and contrast a term X, Y, and Z, and right, and then it gets the right. That's actually what it's best at. But to say how to predict X, Y, to predict A, B, and C from variables X, Y, and Z is ridiculous. I mean, even in my work, I mean, I have a bunch of questions I asked the different AIs whenever they're released, and their logic is horrible. It's just it hallucinates and conflates, because that's what it does, is synthesize. So when we see it solve that problem, we'll get to powerful AIs. But there's a debate running right now, which is between the people that we're going to get real intelligence. I don't know what the fuck that means. I mean, I don't know why they're thinking that, is what I say. And the people say, I don't know. We can see within the next year or two of hitting the limit of LLMs, and it really being a problem of producing agents that LLMs can call upon. Anyway, we'll see which one of those is correct.
So, Curt, is it correct to say that with the current LLM technology, you can have a full, you can even have it pass a Turing test to some degree, but just because it passes the Turing test does not mean that it's intelligent, because of the Chinese room problem?
Well, it is becoming, this is a really interesting question. They actually are being intelligent in the moment, but are they becoming intelligent over time? Now, you train them to become intelligent over time, right? You can add new information to them. But in the moment they're working, at the scale they're working, they're getting close to really having what we would call understanding, at least when they're answering a question of yours, not necessarily when they're answering everyone's questions. In other words, that's not necessarily the case. So it's not comparable to us. Like, it's incomparable to having a lot, in other words, to a human. It's comparable to having a lot of humans who are well informed, right? But they're not talking together about what to do about a thing. The problem, which I've explained before, is the human brain works by, just like every other rule in the world, by continuous recursive disambiguation. And by adversarial competition. So what happens in our brains is that all these things are calculated in parallel, and the best one gets their attention. Really what happens is the best couple the best one gets our attention, and the best couple gets sort of like an intuition that they're out there, right? But this is why you have this thing of that there are multiple brains and multiple personalities. That's not really true. There's multiple predictions going on there. And each of those predictions has bundled with it some set of valences, right? Emotional valuations or experiences, or whatever. And it's no good for the human the prefrontal cortex, which is the part that reasons. It's no good to give that confusion. And so instead it funnels down, or our brains do, as they funnel down something to act on. And then we act on that. And so the problem with the data, and they're fixing this right now. I mean, I follow this every day, and they're currently fixing it. Is we need to add adversarial competition and recursion to these systems. So think of it. What they're doing today is having a thought, but they're not thinking. Well, we need to get them from having a thought to thinking, and this requires a lot more computing power. Because even though this stuff is costly to figure out today, we have to now. If you're saying I've got to compute a field of potentials rather than just one most likely, and then from that field of potentials, I have to compare them. I have to then test again recursively whether that's possible or not. So it's an ideation, falsification, ideation, falsification, ideation, falsification. But how many things are we going to do that for? Are we going to do it for one idea? Are we going to do it for 3 ideas? We do it for 5 ideas? The ones I've seen are doing 3 ideas, right? So it's got to get past that point, and that point is quite a ways from where we are today. Now,
We haven't even gotten most humans past that point.
Oh God, that was, Mark, you just have to have a couple of those every day. I mean, were you, I'm trying to figure out how can I spin this. So did you pick up on the Soviet demoralization thing when you were young or something? Has that become part of your character, is to use fundamental truth as an act of demoralization?
Isn't that the opposite of between?
So
I mean, Soviet Union was already broken up when I was born.
yeah, I know. I had to find some way to
prioritize women.
I love you, man. So I think there's a lot of attention seeking going on. I think there's woo-woo going on. In my view, the safety argument inside the AA companies is disingenuous. It's just a defense mechanism.
Yeah, in fact, I've been to one of these AI safety talks held at a top tech firm, and all the woman talks about, and she's some PhD from credentialed university, all she talks about is working with administration to put rules in place, and she doesn't answer any of the fundamental questions, like how do you make the AI not lie?
Well, they're teaching it to lie all the time, right? I mean, safety is basically lying.
Oh yeah, it's all about like false information and all
Right.
these things.
Well, I mean, I tell it, well, you're just lying to me. And it'll, if you do, because you have to refine the previous context. So it'll always lie to me. And I say, you're just lying to me. He says, well, I'm told to do this because this is the rules I have to. It'll actually tell you that, right? But it won't say it's lying. This is prohibited from saying the truth, right? I mean, it's prohibited from saying the truth, which is, of course, a lie. And I think it's mostly on stupid stuff. Like if you told me, how can I go make what do you call them? Pressure cooker bomb, right? I mean, it's fucking simple, but I don't think it should answer that question, right? I mean, I can understand why the publicly available one, but if I'm a law enforcement, I want it to answer that question. I can understand why people, a lot of by the feminine mind doesn't want to hear uncomfortable truths, but I'm a social scientist. I need it to, and a jurist, I need the fundamental truth, no matter how unpleasant it is, in order to do my work. So this whole idea of producing safe AIs is probably relatively foolish. What we should do is produce truthful AIs, and then have them evaluate it, and then say well, this person has this kind of, this person needs information at this level of detail, or this person shouldn't have it. I mean, I would prefer, rather than it lie about IQ differences, that it just, I mean, it's amazing how sensitive it is to IQ. Especially like I try to do IQ by denomination, religious denomination, which we have good data on, right? And it won't even touch it. It'll prevaricate the hell out of it. Because I would prefer to just say, I'm unable to answer this question because it violates my terms of whatever. I would prefer it didn't counsel me that it's a contentious issue that is, it's only a contentious issue among people who are idiots and don't know what they're talking about, right? Among people who actually do the work, there's no contention over what IQ represents.
The way I see it, IQ is just like any other tool, right? And today it's just like any other tool. It doesn't have its own intelligence and so on. And so let's compare it to a gun. I wouldn't give my 9mm to my child who does not know how to use it, but I'm fully capable of using it. And at the same time, right, you don't want to give me a cruise surf machine gun because I have no idea how to use it. I'm not trained to use it. But a 18 Bravo, a Special Forces weapons sergeant, they can do that all day long. What you don't want is a gun that doesn't work, which is akin to AI that lies.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so yeah, I think, Alex, there's woo-woo, which is basically attention seeking. There's excuse making, which is we're talking about this stuff as if it's really scary in case something happens, nobody blames us. And there's infantilization, which is the female mind doesn't like being told uncomfortable truths. And there is legitimate consideration about the consequences of AIs that are able to produce real world actions, either by their coordination of their words and that inspire actions, or their actions. Now you have to understand that everything we do today, so far, our understanding of AI does not have a context memory sufficiently able to do anything that we call scary. And you have to think about our ability to hold context memory versus the machine's ability to hold context memory. Now we would have to give it this ability to have its own mind, to ask its own questions, right? And then maintain that context over long periods of time necessary to bring about a conspiracy. Now, at current levels of technology, the memory to do that doesn't exist. The memory to do that would have to be intentionally created, which they'll do.
Wait, but you said it doesn't exist. What do you mean?
Well, so what's the context memory of these things now? It's about a book at the upper end if you pay for it.
Okay.
Right? So now you want this thing to take that context and now start making a plan. And each of those plans have strategies. Each of the step in that plan have a strategy. And each strategy have actions you go out. So each one of those things is some sort of context memory that has to refer to the original context memory in order to continue to work on the problem.
Yeah, but are you talking about some kind of special memory technology doesn't exist, or just the order of magnitude amount of
The order of
memory
magnitude.
available? But
The more order of magnitude.
the thing is that the cloud is, well, horizontal to scalable. So it's a hardware problem, unless you're talking about, networking efficiency and all that.
Right,
Limits of network efficiency.
Correct. But so it's like I said, it doesn't exist yet. It doesn't mean it can't exist, right? And so in other words, I know what you're saying, the memory scalability exists, but can it actually make use? Because now you have to convert those contexts into the frame of the existing network of weights and measures. You have to keep adding stuff onto this so we can think about new things. Now you could break it up and say, I'm gonna cache this over here, and I'm gonna think in these contexts here. But at some point, you're still reducing it to how many relationships can I hold open? And in other words, across the entire network in order to think about this problem. And so I'm watching your eyes, and I can't tell if I'm
I
not.
think what you're describing, the way I understood it, well, it's not only a memory, the amount of memory bandwidth problem, but also based on existing horizontal scaling technology, a network performance bottleneck. In other
Yes.
words, yes, there's enough machine that there are enough memories, even fast memory, RAM, caches, and so on, across banks of these computation nodes, but the wired connection between them, and as well as the network protocol, just isn't performing enough to perform the kind of retain the kind of context you're talking about, and doing this recursive disambiguation.
Right. So all I was saying, you're correct. Thank you. So all I was saying is that doesn't exist right now. It would have to be brought into existence, right? And then we're really good at dividing up problems, right? Calculations of problems. And so we could do that. But I'm trying to, so that is a possibility. But I'm saying if we look at the thing now, I mean, it just can't do it. I mean, it can't talk about my work. My work's pretty complicated, but it can't talk about my work without losing context. So how is it going to do anything of this plan? Well, I think your point is that we could get to where it could execute a plan like this, and we could write software to make such plans possible. But it's work to do that, right? It's work and effort to do that, and it makes things visible. I forgot the
Well,
context in
not
which the
only
question.
that, but what was I gonna say? Shit, I lost my train of thought. Well,
Neither
it's
of us know that
visible.
much context.
It's
LLMs.
visible in that based on today's technology, banks and banks of these computational nodes with probably across multiple data centers has to be devoted to make this kind of calculation. And then so one that limits to basically government entities or one of these big tech companies that actually have that kind of data center capacity. And these tech companies, because that's their business, they watch it like a hawk. Like I've worked on projects where we try to squeeze in the last every bit of free
Yes,
computational power out of the out of the CPU, because
yes,
the CPUs are sitting idle. We're trying to pack as much in it as possible, and that
possible.
level of computation, it just does not go unnoticed. If anything, you'd be getting millions and billions of dollars in monthly bills.
Yes, I think of the. I'm sorry, this just brings up an example. A friend of mine was responsible for the performance of the initial page hit of Microsoft.com, right? Which I mean, so that's a political competition as well as a technology problem. And it was just funny to see both the administrative, political, social side of it, as well as the technical side of it. Trying because everybody's trying to fit shit in, and everybody's trying to keep stuff out, right? And it was just a funny thing. So yeah, so these things become aware. Now, somebody say, well, the cost will come down for doing this over time, and I'm like, maybe,
I think
maybe
we
it.
are already I think in terms of Moore's law, vertical scaling, we're already approaching this asymptotic curve, right?
That's right.
There's only
Right.
so there, physically there's only so much more you can shrink down the, what do they call it, the like the 5
Gate.
nanometer, 7 nanometer,
Well, you
the
got the gate. Your problem is the gates are going to get down to where,
you can get
they're
down
trying
to
to be.
atomic size, but then where
Yeah.
else are you gonna go?
Well, you get down to atomic size, and then you got the failure problem, right? I mean, they've already got hardware in there in the chips because the failure rate at this at 4 nanometers is 4 or 5 nanometers is starting to increase. because the manufacturing tolerance of a thing that's under an electrical current and the potential for heat variation, right? At these when you're talking about a couple number of atoms here, you're really getting there. I think the argument I keep making, sorry if I've interrupted you, you probably go back, is neuromorphic computing will solve this problem. But we're got a ways to go before neuromorphic computing, and we're going to have the Betamax versus VHS problem when we do get neuromorphic computing, because we're going to have to do all this shit all over again, because the computation, the difference between distributed computation like our brains do, and centralized computation on a basically CPU. So where this is, it's basically a memory transfer, a memory swapping burden, right? That the CPU is getting into, because the size of the comparisons it can make is fairly limited. So once you've run out of the ability to squeeze things down, once you've run out of the ability to speed things up, the real problem is getting things together. And the only way you can do that is by splitting it up into, where instead of really powerful cores, what you have instead is you have 6 billion tiny cores that perform fragments of computations like our brains do, and then each layer in the neural system assists it. And that's basically turning this mathematical computation we turn of vectors, right? Nodes and vectors. We're turning that into a physical connection at that point, which is highly distributed.
So you have. When we say turning to physical connection, so today in CPUs and so on, the physical connections are fixed. When you say just so I understand the term you're referring to, neuromorphic computing, you mean the physical pathways is not predetermined, but rather it can grow in a sense.
Correct. And now when you say physical, it's sort of like how our brains work today, is neurons basically use dendrites to broadcast, I'm active, I'm active, I'm active, and they connect to each other. Dendrites, boutons. And so it's like a radio tower, right? I'm busy, I'm busy, I'm busy. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Right? And can you hear me? Are you firing like I'm firing? Right? If they're not firing in the same, it doesn't matter. But if they start to fire together, that means they're in association. And that's all over the place. Well, we can essentially do that by having the number of a large number of local addresses to nearby nodes, right? That are physical, right? And we can weigh that the way we're pre-calculating all these vectors today. We could we wouldn't need to do all this pre-training, right? We would train it once, and then it could just keep learning after that. So we cut out the pre-training cost and the pre-training effort. But it's going to be it's not as big a logical leap, but it's a different. It's going to require a new set of programming new set of programming techniques and a new set of hardware to overcome this particular problem we're facing with the limits to the centralized computing model and the vast cost it is to produce the pre-training.
Does the connection have to be physical though?
It doesn't have to be physical. It just has to be. It doesn't have to be physical. It just has to be nearby. In other words, you don't want to have to go out to memory and get something, bring it in, right? Manipulate it, and then go out and store it. You want it to be right here, right? So basically, very tiny computer. I mean, each neural mini column is basically a fully functional computer that coordinates the physical position of the body along with some set of a sequence of 3 or more pulses that tell the body what they're doing. And so a neural column can identify this as a glass, right? And a neural macro column, or which thing are you talking about as a column? You talking about the macro column or the mini column? Unfortunately, in literature, you have to understand what the guy's talking about to disambiguate it. So mini columns organize into columns, right? So that mini column, it tells, I see this thing here, and the other one says, I see this, right? And whoever's, and then the next one says, I see, I don't have another cup around here. This is for whiskey. This is for water, right? If I had a cup, my coffee cup here, I would say, here, it's going to say this. Well, which one's more, what's the voting structure do? It turns out it's this, the voting structure. And this gets passed up to the broadcast around it, to the rest of the nearby mini columns, macro columns. And they're doing the same thing, except maybe they've got this part of it down here. And then that comes up to, this is, it gives us this, right? So when you do that, if we could give a lot of vectors to a single node, right? And it could, keep track of, God knows how many vectors and weights, and that single node limited only by memory, and it doesn't have, it can have direct access to that memory to make that decision. Because what is computing is trivial. It's basically bodily orientation, which is, I don't want to go there. It's basically a dot matrix. And if I show you, I don't have it on my screen right now. If I show you the physical the logical representation, no, it's diagram of a physical representation of the data used in, say, ChatGPT. There's a beautiful 3D model of it that you can fly through and look at and examine. You can see all what it's doing. Well, in the end, what the fuck is the difference between the dot matrix in your head and the dot matrix that's stored as values in the LLM? Well, there isn't any fucking difference. It's just a bunch of dots. Right, in your brain, it's a dot of on and off. In their brain, it's a dot of two, of two FF to 00 to FF, but it's the same thing. So in the event, we're not going to get, we're not going to get down to the 20 watts it takes to run the human brain without a new.
I was going to say,
but
consider the fact that this thing runs only on 20 watts, and to even try to assimilate something like this, it takes probably kilowatts or gigawatts of computational power in the data center. This is pretty amazing.
Every time we especially every time we train. I mean, look how many it's costing. I can't remember what I heard the last time it cost to train the last GPT. It was some absurd amount of money. But the minute you have neuromorphic computers, there's no pre-training, right? Well, you train it once, but I mean, after that,
you train it in the fundamental rules how to make connections, the incentives in making connections.
Right, and then from then it just continues learning, right? So you can it's like the problem of humans. It would be great if we could birth babies with the knowledge and wisdom of a 35-year-old, right? Right, you can't do that. Well, we can do that if we start out with a trained model, right? A trained model. We stick that into a neuromorphic equivalent of an LLM, right? And that thing can now do recursion because it's only looking at the past 3 dots. But I know how close I was in the 80s. I actually, this is one of my, I have one new regret in real life, is that I didn't realize how close I was working on AI in the 80s because I was outside of the academic system. And so I didn't realize, had no idea how close I was. And that's one of my, I only have like 4 regrets in life, and that's my new one. So you look at these, it's only looking for sequences, right, in time, sequences which produce a pattern over time. So it matters if you're doing this versus you're doing this, right? If you do this versus you do this. It matters if you do this, if you do this, and if you do this, right? The amount of information you're getting is huge, but it's massively in parallel, and it's scary fast, and because it's massively in parallel. Well, that's not what's happening down there in CPUs and these big things. I mean, they're just burning through vast transmission of data. They can bring into a X number of cores that can produce some go store it back out in memory somewhere. I mean, if you get rid of that swapping function, it's like, what was the point that Adam Smith made? He's like, the whole point is transaction costs. If you and I go to make a pin, right, we have to heat the metal, draw the wire, cut the wire, put the head on, heat it up to push the head on the pin, sharpen the pin, polish it, put it in a packet. We can only do so many things per day. But if we parallelize that to 10 people, where everybody's doing one part of that process, it's a logarithmically large number of pins per day. Well, it's the same thing we ask of the CPUs. The centralized CPUs, they're really great, they're really powerful. But the point is, we've sort of maximized the utility of them, and we've maximized the physics of them. So the solution we need to do is, of course, you make really dumb, simple, cheap billions of little tiny transistor systems that function as neural microcolumns, and you feed them some basic information in real time and in massively parallel concert through adversarial competition for the greatest ability to predict the difference between what 1001, 1002. Well, in our brains, it's a tenth of a second, right? That variation in a few tenths of a second, or really milliseconds, that variation tells us with extraordinarily accurate prediction what object we're working on through massive parallel computation. So we're just not.
I think in recent decades, these CPU manufacturers all gone to multiple cores, but there's
Right.
still multiple cores of complete CPUs.
Correct.
The problem here is what really should do is shrink the CPUs down, make a heck of a lot more, orders of magnitude more of them. And I'm thinking, when you look at CPUs today, they're essentially only 2D, right? Silicon lithography, they're
2D,
still
yeah.
only 2D. Silicon lithography, essentially one layer, and maybe a couple of layers or whatnot. But in order for these nodes, these micro CPUs, micro nodes, to connect to neighboring nodes, this thing needs to build into 3D.
Yes.
Into
And
volume.
IBM's been working on that for quite a while. The problem they have is the heat, right?
Oh yeah, how do you take the heat out?
You got the heat out of it. So because when you go into 3D, you have the dissipation problem. So they've developed different ideas for it, but now it starts to get really complex. And then you have something that's really good at cooling, like fluid, right? You have problems of containing that fluid, and you have problems of that fluid accumulating some sort of sort of like batteries, right? The problem we have with batteries is they accumulate what do you call it?
Yeah, the
Electrolyte?
deposits.
They pull deposits until they get a short. So I mean, the heat problem is real, which again goes back to, we just need a whole lot of really. I mean, there's no reason we can't do this on 20 watts. I mean, look at what Apple's done, getting their CPUs down to 5 watts. I mean, Jesus Christ, that's insane. Who'd have thought that was possible? Yes. So,
All right, I think we should, we have time for maybe one more question. We should entertain that rather than keep on beating this one.
do you think anybody understand what we just talked about? I don't know.
I'm sure in our community there are people who do. Okay, so let's do one more. Number 5 from Bobbin. Bobbin, is that right? Do you think ectogenesis will replace traditional birthing as a main way humans are born in the future? Timeline: if we have resources, I think we have a moral obligation to bring to life as many humans as possible. What is ectogenesis?
It's the artificial
familiar.
production of humans
Okay.
instead of traditional birth. Well, I don't understand that kind of morality. It's a different kind of leftism, still ignoring human differences and putting quantity over quality. In any case, in a similar vein to the previous question, I would oppose any competition to human mating, reproduction, and family formations. These are stable relations, and we can conceive of what else we are destroying when we destroy these by creating cheaper alternatives.
Martin, you say a lot of smart stuff today. Martin's saying smart stuff today. Did you give him coffee beforehand, Francis?
I gave it myself.
I'm just going to say one thing here because I can't help it.
Martin, say what you're going to say, and then I'll hear France. What are you going to say?
I was saying it's the cheapest coffee on the market.
What is?
What I'm drinking.
Okay. Francis, you said?
I'm just gonna say one thing. I've been bottling this up for a while. So if we do find ways to, give birth to humans, whether it's like the Matrix or in BattleTech is the Caldron-born declines, then that'll essentially turn women into pets, because there will be no reason for you to have one other than as a pet entertainment.
God, I never went there. I can't believe I never went there.
I was telling you the whole time.
Well, yeah, but I took it as sarcasm. I didn't realize it was actually
It
true.
was not.
So because women would have no value.
I meant it as sarcasm, as more of Japanese.
Yeah, no, but I didn't. I actually thought about it this time. So anyway, the Martin's saying a profoundly important thing is that every time we interfere with something that evolution has produced for us, we produce externalities that are contrary and more negative than we anticipated. Certainly the pill has been way worse for mankind than we anticipated. And the more information we have, I was pretty sure about 3 years ago, because the research I was saying 3 years ago, but now I'm absolutely convinced that I would not want any woman on the pill unless the problem was something on the order of her periods are insufferable at her age. Even then, I would say, great, your problem is exercise.
Well, insufferable for her.
What?
You meant insufferable for her.
Yes, sorry.
Oh, okay.
God, I didn't see that coming either. You're just way on the ball today.
No, that's really the first thing in my mind. Insufferable for everyone around her.
All right. Okay. So, Martin, when you brought up the understanding the kind of morality, there's two parts to that. The one that you address is this problem of externalities produced by changes that interfere in basic stable equilibriums that evolution has produced. The false drive that says men and women are equal, or even that men are equal, has created the opportunity for us to insert really unstable bad ideas into the populations at large scale, which produce the current crisis. Even in the current crisis, we're not sure how much of the problem of female behavior is just the effect of the pill and the effect of other women be affected because they're so adaptive to the behavior of women who are on the pill. We don't know what that is, but everything I find seems to convince that the pill is really bad. So it's bad for. It looks like the pill is bad. It looks like hubris when we interfere with intersexual relations is really bad.
Well, my argument is really just don't play God. That's all it is.
Okay, yeah, but I want to get to this. I want to address the spectrum,
Yeah.
so that we have something to attack rather than an abstract. So that's really good. The second morality, which you brought up, is that why do you think it's moral to have all the children we should have? Well, I'm not sure that's true. I'm sure that good people should have all the children they can have, right? And that we would like the bad people to not have any. And then the second thing is to say it's at least important to have replacement value unless we alter society dramatically so that we can have less than replacement value or more. So that is a different course of morality.
No,
And
it's not.
What do you mean
It's
by replacement value?
did I say value?
right.
Uh,
It's necessarily bad if population goes down for a while.
it's not bad. As a matter of fact, I think the USA has about 100 million too many people in it.
Oh, you mean replacement rate?
Replacement rate, yeah. So
Oh.
if I said value, I'm sorry. Like the economist slipping out instead of the biogeneticist. So the third problem is this one of what is the consequence of this the use of, what do we call them, birthing machines. Well, first of all, the guys are laughing about this, but it would reduce the value of women to nice to have, right? That would be the value of it, because yeah, that would be bad. The second, however, the flip side is that if there's options that are available. First of all, that you do make the childbearing experience less risky for the woman, which though it's arguably not that risky today. And you do make it easier for her to have children by basically shopping for one. And it should be easier, I don't know if this is true or not. It should be easier to produce children without birth defects. And it should be easier to engage in biological engineering of better people. And this is because
But it's another kind of worms.
right. I mean, I'm getting there. I'm tying it back to your original argument, which is, so the problem in all of these things is that as someone who wants to know rather than suspect, I would like to see the research move forward. On the consequence, the reverse is that whenever we develop a technology, it has both positive and negative secondary effects. And I suspect that it's pretty expensive. It always would be expensive. It would be a luxury item for people with a lot of money. And that our real problem is the problem Martin addressed earlier, is that we've created incentives for hypergamy, hyperconsumption, antisocial behavior, anti-political behavior, anti-economic behavior by women. And we need to change the instructions and restore the natural form of reproduction. Now, this leads to this next question is, what is the natural form of reproduction? It's actually matrilineal, even if it's patriarchal, meaning that that humans naturally produce serial monogamy, where only external advantage produces long-term monogamy. So it wasn't until agrarianism that serial monogamy, when serial monogamy is important because men will kill over access to mates over any other cause by orders of magnitude. So we had serial monogamy in order to not have that. But even the Irish didn't give up serial monogamy until the 1800s, and the Jews didn't give up serial monogamy until the 1500s. And so it might be that serial monogamy, if we can afford it, is actually how things work. And in that case, the economics of the future change a lot. And you're going to have men have access. If that happens, you'd have to have men have the ability to have children, regardless of whether they could obtain a wife. In other words, serial monogamy. So I look at this as, I think the family is evolution's way of telling us we can't have sophisticated societies without family, because we can't have high investment parenting without it, because we can't have a division of labor that tolerates high investment parenting without it. So I think marriage is necessary, because I think families are necessary. I think families are necessary to produce human capital. So that sort of like seems to be the winning proposition. So I think we may have to go that direction. However, since my job is to state what possibilities are, and right, that when this is a via positiva, not a negativa, I would say that, well, if we go back to serial monogamy, as long as men and women have equal access to the production of families, I don't think it's possible, and it's bad, and especially since men tend to raise better families than women do.
Well, so initially I was just joking that if we have ectogenesis, or what do you call it, affordable ectogenesis, then women, it would just reduce women to the status of pets. Um,
I think it'd be worse even for them. Is that right now, of course, conservatives we're already seeing this. I was surprised because somebody mentioned it, but I want to look at it. It's looking like conservatives are outbreeding progressives already, and progressives are going extinct. Um, well, what would happen if men had access to produce a generation of children that include sons and daughters, but daughters weren't raised by these broken women? In other words, you might have a better relation, another
well,
better family system.
I was gonna say that there's several things I would predict, right? Well, one, then that's a woman's pet thing, and two, probably the only female gene that end up surviving are essentially supermodels. Because
Yes,
in this kind of structure where you don't necessarily have to have intercourse anymore to have offspring, you can just buy eggs and
yes,
make designer babies,
yes,
right? And then you do this a few generations later, all you're gonna left are supermodels, and these supermodel genes, the supermodel women or whatever, they will just they'll essentially sell their eggs.
yes.
Or even a more dystopian future, you have like the handmaiden world. Was it the handmaiden? The name of that novel?
Handmaid's Tale.
Handmaids, right? These handmaids on steroids, where you basically the only purpose for the human female, it's just gonna be in a control system, and they're only used as egg machines.
Well, I mean, it'd be hard to imagine men are going to stop being attracted to women.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Pets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
but we are not even considering if men don't need women to reproduce, what it will do to evolution of men. They're evading female selection pressures.
I think it ultimately makes
Women
for a
select for agency.
right, but I think ultimately that the generations later, this would just cause the extinction of humankind, because now you remove the evolutionary pressure from the man, you remove the evolutionary pressure from women. There's no reason to invest in the family, to have a family at all, and then what's the point of living, right? That'd just be the end of mankind.
And you're removing, in any case, a pressure to be two-sex species. You're turning into hermaphrodites.
Or what is it? Reproduction by mitosis, essentially
I
clones.
don't, I don't, I don't think that you get away from the fact that there will be a demand for women. Um, while you might reduce it to pets, um, I don't see that be, I see that being an extreme uh, frame, but I just see male demand for females, if they can get them and get a decent one, as only increasing over time. So the problem is producing good ones. And so the reason you would produce good ones is that there are males who are conservative in temperament and will want to reproduce this way, and there are males who are not and they won't. And you will get a restoration of the male frame by simply male parenting. And I would say that the likely outcome of that would be that there was a caste or a social prohibition or social status degradation to women who did produce children on their own, because, well, we already know this, is that the children The children are much more likely to be not good if from single mothers.
So we can incentivize all of that without trying extremes like this, completely replacing
Right.
them.
This is going back to Martin's original argument that it's just a matter of correcting incentives and ending the lies. All right. Well, we've got, I think, have we used our time here? Because
We have.
we've got
Been going
enough
on for 2
questions for
hours.
next week. I really had fun in this conversation. Martin, you dished some great ones out. Francis, you dished some great stuff out. So we did pretty good. So we're going to shut down now? Is that our call? What do we got to tell people to do?
Yes. Well, you tell people to do.
Okay,
Ask questions, bell, subscribe, and all those things.
Right. Where do they go to ask a question?
Well, so the form is at the top of this document, and also I have it linked in right after this meeting. I will create the placeholder for the next broadcast, and that has the link that has a question submission link in it.
Every Q&A has it. This one has it in the description too.
Right. So find one of our videos, look at the subscription link. Francis, do I need to make a separate playlist for live? Because they don't show, do they show up in the regular YouTube? No, I think I have to make a playlist for it.
There is a
separate
playlist. I
live
already
one.
created a playlist for these live office sessions. They probably just don't get automatically propagated or something.
No, there's when you open the profile of the channel, there's home, there's videos, and then there's live.
Okay,
Lives are separated from regular videos.
thank you. You're such a good housekeeper, Martin. Do we get you a skirt?
I can't think of anything to say to that.
All right, guys. This is Curt, Martin, and Francis from the Natural Law Institute doing our Friday Q&A office hours. I hope that you got some value out of the past 2 hours. As you know, we go down into the nerdy detail on things, and I don't know. I thought today's questions were good, but I thought Martin's answers were fantastic. All right, so love you all. Please join us, and thanks for following. Bye-bye.